What's up, guys? Welcome to the show. Vaughn Joseph here. Thanks for tuning in today. So, as you might remember, a few years back, we had author and filmmaker Eli Steele on the podcast. He spoke with us in Los Angeles, actually, with Miss Eling Zhang, did the interview for me, my LA cohort. He had a book and a documentary film called How Jack Became Black, which was a documentary that educates and tells you all about box ticking and what his third generation mixed children had to go through in order to become part of the Los Angeles Unified School District. A very interesting story. If you didn't see that, check it out on v3tv.uk. For all you guys out there listening to us on iTunes and Spotify, don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, and thank you very much for your support. So off the heels of that, joining me today, I have Miss, I didn't even ask how to pronounce your last name, so hopefully we don't butcher this too bad and she walks off the podcast before it even starts. Nicole Draffen or Draffen?
Draffen.
Draffen. See, I had it right the first time.
Got it.
She's got a book called Hyphened-Nation. Don't check the box. Welcoming you to the Authors of Amazon podcast segment for the Vaughn Joseph Show. Thank you for joining me today. How are you today?
I'm great, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's an absolute pleasure. So tell me about your book so we can just get right into the goodies.
Okay. Well, the book was inspired from my travels. I went to England first to run a marathon, and I loved it. I loved the interactions I had with people, and then I went there to live for a year. And after I went to live there, it sparked some epiphanies that I had no idea of, that I was in a different world. So growing up my entire life in the United States, I'm used to the way that we categorize each other as Americans, you know, Asian American, Latino American, African American. Well, in England, I was just an American. And it was shocking, disturbing, and enlightening how differently I was treated and felt about myself by merely being an American versus being an other American, a hyphenated American. And it changed me in ways that were so intrinsic to my character and the person that I am that once I came home, you know how they say that once you see something, you can't unsee it. That was me. I felt like I wanted to scream to the world, at least to the United States citizens, this is not how it is. We're in a bubble. This is not how the United States is the only country that hyphenates their citizens by ethnicity before nationality. And what a travesty and injustice, how unfair it is, and how it creates the foundation for racism in this country. It perpetuates it because it allows us to be labeled and stereotyped. So that's what prompted me to write the book. I originally wrote it for my nieces and nephews, but it was something that needed to be more, have a wider audience. But that's how the book came to be.
Excellent. Yeah, that is one thing that I found interesting. Obviously, me being in the UK still, is I'm an American. And we had this conversation on an earlier podcast that there's no such thing as an African American in this country. They don't even know what you're talking about. And realistically, when you ask someone that's from here, why did you leave? First off, you said you came for a year. What made you decide to go back, and how's the transition been?
Well, I was only there for a visit, for a year for a visit. And then, so I had no intention of staying. Now, once I was there, did I want to leave? I would say no. I loved it. But my entire family is here in the United States. And so that's why I left. The transition as far as coming back, it was difficult at first because you're not bombarded with images of ignorance, is what I call it. When I was living in the UK, everything was a surprise. I never knew what I was going to see. People never gave a second look at a couple if they were of two different ethnicities. It's just like, who cares? Here, it's a curiosity. It's still considered in some parts of the country a curiosity. You know, people are looking like, hey, what, you know, these are Americans that we're talking about, that are looking at other Americans curiously if they are of two different ethnicities. So when I came back, I felt like I was used to being bombarded with ignorance. But when I came back, I had let my mantle drop. There's a chapter in my book called The Mantle. And in that chapter, I'm trying to explain to people who are not of color what it's like to be a person of color in the United States. And I think I did a really good job at that, because I describe what we wear as people of color as a mantle, like a shield. And we use it to keep the everyday stones and slings of inequities of life. We use that to bounce off of us, because we can't allow it to enter into our psyche, or it changes us personally, or it just gets to the point where you can't carry it anymore. So when I went to England, and I had to, and I didn't have to wear that mantle. I didn't understand that I didn't have to wear that mantle. You're almost waiting for the ignorance, and you don't see it, and you're like, oh, and very slowly that mantle starts disintegrating, and you can be your authentic self. So when I came back, as far as the transition, looking back into what you asked me earlier, is that I actually I felt my mantle having to be rebuilt all over again, because I was back in a place where ignorance is the norm. So that was the hardest part.
Yeah. You said about something you said about racism, or being, when you're hyphenating your name, and it creates this category for racism to exist.
Uh-huh.
It seems to me like we being minorities, minor being the root, of that word, we're already placed at the bottom,
Yes, and also the hyphen. A hyphen and a minus symbol are the same. They look the exact same, and they are treated in the exact same way. They minimize your nationality and take away from who you are. I've been asked over 100 times in my life, I'm sure more, but I'm just going to give a round number. What are you? People ask that question because they want to know how to treat you. They want to know what label to give you. They want to know what stereotype you fit into, so they know how to treat you. Instead of just saying, this is another human being, let me learn about you. They want to know, what are you, so that they can figure out how to connect with you. That is the most ignorant way to connect with someone that there is. Yet, in conversations where there's nothing to do with ethnicity, I've been asked that in the middle of a conversation that has absolutely nothing to do with anything will be in reference to your ethnicity. And so I'm really tired of it. And I really don't want this for my nieces and nephews. I don't want this for this generation, for the next generation to come. I want them to say, hey, what's a hyphenated American? So this is something that I'm bringing to everyone, so that we can all work together to end this. This is why this book, I brought this book out again. It's republished and revised in a census year, because they only do the census every 10 years. So, they have white and then everybody else on the census. Right. So you have to check off these boxes for what you are and why. If there's, if you want to know demographics, I'm good with that. Age, your school, your education, how many pets you have, things like that, I'm fine with. But when they need to know my ethnicity, it's irrelevant. And, just like for disadvantage, I was talking about this. If you have 1,000 disadvantaged white people, you have 1,000 disadvantaged people of color, you have 2,000 disadvantaged Americans. Right. So why does the government need to know this? Because possibly it's the old adage, divide and conquer. Keep people separated, because that's how you maintain power. Right. And that's the only reason I can think of.
Yeah, it's definitely that. On the grand scheme of things, it's from my understanding of it, it's where we're going to allocate tax dollars. And when we start to allocate more or less to certain areas, it's because of what you just said. So if we know that in this sector of the community, it's, it's 68% minority populated, they're not going to get as much money as this sector of the community that's 60 or 80, whatever percent white. So
exactly.
That's just how America is structured. So it
shouldn't be that.
No, of course it shouldn't be, but it's definitely it's definitely that. And I think it kind of gets back down to the root of what the issue is that we're seeing now in America with protests and things like that, is because we don't really have a voice of power in legislation and in the government. The government is run predominantly by special interest groups, which are brought to the table by big business, which are owned by white people. So
exactly,
when you have that power dynamic, you literally just don't have a seat at the table, and you don't have a voice.
Exactly. But it's funny. I think in some ways we do have power, but we completely give it away. And when I say that, I'm talking about the media. For example, the media is a DIY for racism all over the globe. The American media, which is extremely popular, teaches the globe how to treat people of color. They give their vision of the way that we're supposed to act, we're supposed to look, we're supposed to be, and they broadcast it all over the world. So people of color, Asian, Latino, Black, whatever, if we stopped buying into that, if we stopped putting our dollars toward any show that depicts us in a negative manner, and all the advertisers around them that support them depicting us in a negative manner, we just say, I'm not going to watch you because I don't like what you're doing, we will be able to stop that. We live in a capitalist society. And what do the broadcasters want? They want our money. And if they want our money, they're going to do what we want them to do. So we have the power. They just need to be called out, and people need to just stop watching these shows, because quite honestly, there are a lot of shows that they're terrible, and yet they're popular. And it's like, why? I understand, we want to see, Asian people on television. We want to see Black people on television. I do too, but guess what? Not in that manner. If it's in that manner, I won't watch it. I refuse to give my dollars.
Why do you think we don't do more of that? Because we did it one day. We actually just talked about this on a podcast, because they're going to do it over here in England, where they're going to have a Black Dollar Day, I think he called it. But why do you think that we don't do more of that? Because that's something that I know that, like, my mom and her friends used to do, like, way back in the day, in the 70s, 80s, whatever. They weren't happy with service. Well, I'm not spending my money here anymore.
That's right.
I've brought that into my life. Whereas, if you treat me badly, okay, you might have had a bad employee, but if it's like something corporate wise, I'm not dealing with you anymore.
I'm 100% just like you. I think the reason we don't do it is because we don't realize that it's not like this all over the world. I think that if we traveled more, and everyone can't travel, and I understand that, but it's time for us to educate ourselves on what it's like other places outside of the United States. The United States really, it keeps people in a bubble of ignorance, where we don't realize that it's not like this everywhere. We're not treated like this everywhere. We're not seen like this everywhere. And people of color are not depicted negatively everywhere. It is here in the United States that this happens. And it's the fault of the media and the government. I blame them implicitly for this. Have you heard a presidential candidate say, I want the American vote, instead of I'm trying to get the Black vote, I'm trying to get the Asian vote, I'm trying to get the Latino vote, instead of I want the American vote? The closest that came to that was President Obama. Outside of that, I haven't seen any other presidential candidates who, we have the name calling and the finger pointing, but we don't have one presidential candidate who calls all Americans Americans. They hyphenate Americans and separate them.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is to do with the way that they monitor where their votes come from, which is unfortunate because they'll see, well, this percentage of this, population is voting for this person or us or whatever, and how do we get that vote versus that percentage is voting for us? Or why aren't we getting that, that black vote? Or, that's why they categorize it as such. And even in, like, I had a friend, she used to be a corrections officer in a prison, and she says it's easier for us to monitor these people or at least the activities because of the way that they isolate themselves by race. So you have the whites, you have the blacks, you have the the Mexicans and the others, as they say. And as soon as I see someone from that group and someone from this group coming together, I know that something's wrong. So a lot of times they categorize us in such a way because it's easier for them to monitor things, unfortunately, in a way that they can try and maybe focus their activities or their energies in other directions, do you think?
True. I agree with that. I mean, I don't know a lot about prison, but I do know a little bit. And thank God.
Good, right.
And all right. And prison's a microcosm of the United States. Our prisons, English prisons, aren't like that. Okay, they don't separate themselves like that. And there's a lot of other things that English prisons don't do that they do in the United States, because I've talked about that with, others, because they asked me,
right,
why, the whys, not to delve into that too deeply. And in other countries, it's not separated like that. That is a microcosm of America, how everything's separated in the prison. I mean, they do that for survival, more or less.
Right.
But outside of that, I mean, here we are where we have these everyone, I don't want to live there. I feel uncomfortable there because people don't look like me. That is more, not indicative on the word I'm trying, it's more endemic to America than in other countries where people just live where they live. I mean, it might be based on money. I mean, how much money can you afford to live in a certain place? But I lived in various places throughout northern England, and I stayed for a while in London. And, it was just a nice mixture of people from all over the world and people of different ethnicities. And never did I hear the African American come out. But yeah, so when it comes to that, that's why it's probably the worst of, if you had to put America in the very worst way you could put that would be an American prison.
Right.
It's the worst, but it's almost mirrors how it is outside, but probably a few years back. I think that as far as like the melting pot, we're not a melting pot. We are a buffet. Everything, we have a whole bunch of stuff, but everything's in a different section, so you can get whatever you want, but you just make sure you go to here, here, here. It's not truly a melting pot. England is about 20 years ahead of us in regards to diversity and culture and things of that nature, because it's just, I don't know why. Now, believe me, I know that England has its ills just like America does, but the fact that they have their ills and they're still so far ahead of us it's actually a little frightening. It's like, wow,
I think I say we as I'm English or something, but I think the people over here, they hide it a little better. What I'm seeing now is once we have the protests that were taking place in the States have gone global, essentially, and they've moved towards London and other parts of the country, that veil is starting to be pulled back a little bit. Like, we're seeing people that are behaving a little bit off color than, they're not behaving the way that they would normally behave here.
I agree. I saw some of that. But let me tell you, just exactly, it goes straight to my point of that America is a DIY for racism all over the globe. America has taught everyone else. I mean, I'm not saying that we were the first racist, but our media has definitely assisted in that. So look at this. They have these protests going on over here, and it has affected the globe, globally. So if but not for American media, who knows if that would have expanded across the pond. But our American media is showing that. I don't know, maybe it will, I don't know, but I'm just saying that it really shows a lot, it makes a big impact on the way people think about others. Now, speaking of that, speaking of the whole movement and everything, not to get too deeply into it, but I'm glad that there's this renaissance that is happening as far as it's coming to light, that all these injustices that have happened, that have had to make this movement a reality. But at the same time, it's quite disgusting and disappointing that I have to look at a sign in different neighborhoods that just basically say, just because my skin is brown, I matter. So please don't kill me just because my skin is brown. Please don't look at me and label me and stereotype me just because my skin is brown. Please don't feel that it's okay to treat me worse than everybody else just because my skin is brown. That's exactly what that means. And it's terrible. It's sad that it has to happen. And so, this is why it ties into what I'm talking about. We live in a hyphened nation. And the movement that sprung from that, don't check the box, is just exactly that. Stop checking these boxes because you define you. Stop allowing others to define who you are. I mean, I fell into that. I consider myself to be a pretty savvy person, and I even fell into it just because I didn't know. Right. I had no idea. If I had lived most of my life in England and came here, it would have confused me. Like, I don't understand this, But I grew up in a complete bubble of not knowing. I had educated parents, educated siblings, we're all doing very well. And, even with that, you still have, you deal with a lot of things that you say, wow, and you wonder why this has to be. So, yeah, so I think that a lot of people, people will wake up and they want change. And I think now is the time to do it.
With America being basically just an amalgamation of every country in the world, it's kind of hard to say that you're just American because your origins are from somewhere else. So I understand to an extent why it happens, but why white people aren't coupled into that hyphenated situation as well is what confuses me, because
they used to be.
None of them are from there.
Yes, they used to be. Irish Americans called themselves Irish American, Swedish American, German American. They did. But Roosevelt, and actually that's a chapter in my book, I talk about that, is that he basically said that there's no room in America for a hyphenated American. There's no room in this country for a hyphenated American. And then he took off that. Calling yourself American does not take away from who you are. Before you know where I'm from, before you know who I am, you know that I have some African origin.
Right.
Okay, before I open my mouth. That's obvious. So why do I have to label that?
Right. My
nationality is American, born and bred. My cultural identity actually is American because I don't know any other culture. Right. But my ethnic origin is, some of it is African. So why do I have to label myself based on somebody else's idea or label of who they think I am, so that's what they should call me? And then I'm swirled with all the different preconceived notions and stereotypes that go along with that. And here's the thing. They say, well, some stereotypes are positive. If you're Asian, really smart. That doesn't even work. I have a lot of Asian friends who hate that stereotype because the expectations that are put on them are horrible. Or that they're, meek. Same thing with Latino. You're spicy. Nobody wants to, don't put me in that label. If I was Latina, okay, I'm supposed to be this way just because I'm American.
Yeah,
so
that happens to us all, though. Sorry to cut you. Is that
no.
It's as a black man, for example, I'm supposed to be able to run fast, dunk a basketball, dance well, be well endowed, be able to rap, love fried chicken, and I don't really subscribe to any of that stuff.
Okay.
So it is a bit weird that we have that sort of expectation from people, and it's sad. Like I don't understand why we've come to that point. I think what we really hopefully will have happen is that, like you said, this will all be dropped eventually, because we're raising a generation that will raise a generation that won't tolerate that at all. So
I agree.
We're here to say this is what has been happening for too long. Let's do something about it. We're more modern now than we were back then. And we were just talking about this earlier. Is my mom raised me from a 1950s, 60s mindset, from all the stuff that she saw, Watts riots, living in Detroit and seeing the race riots in Detroit, and that was a big deal to see a police officer put a dog on somebody, or the fire department to be hosing down people, or just people just being beaten up in the street for being black, just trying to go to school. That's completely so removed from my grasp of reality that I can't even imagine what these people went through. And they instill that in us, and obviously that it wasn't really the reality that I was living in the 80s, 70s, and 80s. But now that we're seeing this resurgence of this nonsense, and the society is a little bit different, the young people, they don't even they want safe spaces at school. They want to have a place where they can go and cry or whatever. And now you're telling me that I have to hate somebody just because of how they look. They're not going to put up with that for their kids. They're not going to want their kids to have that world. So hopefully we're able to see some of that come to fruition down the line. And I joke about this to my people back home all the time. It's like, this exercise or this experiment known as freedom is not working. This whole American thing, not working.
It's not.
And working.
I know it sounds lofty, but I honestly believe that this is a big part of that answer. And I think the book is only a little bit over 100 pages long, but it's a very deep read. I tried to make it so that it gave you something to think about after every chapter. So I hope that largest hope is that people will read the book, and it will give them some understanding of, not only for people of color, a little bit more information, because I talk about the Constitution as well, but also it'll give people who are not of color some more understanding of what it's like for us to live in a hyphened nation, and also what we can do to change it. And that's the thing. It's like, it's not enough to talk about it. You have to be about it. You really have to do something about it. So I'm really, really hoping, and I know it's a lofty goal, but I think it's an attainable goal for us to get together and work together as a nation to end this nonsense.
That's the only way that you're really going to get anything changed. And I heard someone on a different pod say, because they talk about how, you see people, white people saying things to the effect of, I have friends that are black, or I went to university with someone that's black, or, I have a cousin that's black, whatever the case may be. And so I stand behind them, but that's not enough. Okay.
It's not.
So you have the
Actions.
power. Yeah, you have the power to do something about it. Whereas I have to do what you're seeing just to bring attention to it. Whereas you can just shut stuff down, like, period.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're a millionaire, you've got the means to shut it down. So you have to stop shaking your head and start breaking the bread and make it so that we can say, oh, well, this high powered attorney from this law firm is just shutting down this company, this company, this company, and they're not giving any more of their money and fundraising dollars to this company. That's impact. Me getting 100 people together and saying, we're not you drinking Starbucks anymore. Starbucks is, they're going to monitor it, and they're going to be aware that this is going to be a potential PR issue. So we need to institute, what do you call it? Sensitivity training. That's what they call it.
Yeah.
So,
well, see, we're used to, you know what? You're absolutely right. The thing about it is, we're used to crumbs. We're just a little at a time. It's going to come. It's going to come. I say no more. I say that it is now time to basically have a seat at the table. And to do that, you have to basically speak up. And it's time. And I honestly believe it's going to happen because this this is just basically getting its legs and moving on. But it's getting a lot of momentum, and it's going to be more momentum to come, because I planned on probably a little later on in the year, once the pandemic has hopefully, fingers crossed, died down. I'm traveling over to England, and so I'll be over there and hopefully do some talk shows or just some radio broadcast and things like that, and talk about this a little bit more. Because this is not only about the United States. It does talk about, I know that there are issues going on over there as well. And hopefully maybe this can help with that as well.
Yeah, there was someone that had a White Lives Matter banner flying behind an airplane last week over a football game, soccer game.
Wow.
And
that must have gone across really well.
No, it didn't. It probably did with the English Defense League, with the racists that were a part of supporting it. But
that's too bad.
Yeah, but it's there, so we have to, you address it and you keep it pushing. So when you come out, you're more than welcome to come and sit with the pod, and we'd love to have you in. What's up with the audio book on your book? Do you have an audio book?
I don't have an audiobook yet. My book is actually on the website hyphened-Nation.com.
Right.
And then you can find it on Amazon as well. Don't have an audiobook yet. I really want a good voice for that audiobook. I'm just not sure yet. You're looking like you do audiobooks.
I've done quite a few Audible books for Amazon, and I also voice video games, so we can have that conversation offline.
Yes, most definitely, because I do need an audiobook.
Yeah, I was looking at that. So I was looking for that. So, yes, definitely come sit with us. I'm going to try and get you in on another pod next week, potentially as well, because I'd love to continue this conversation. But this interview, I like to keep nice and compact and only about your book and whatnot. And we don't want to deviate too far from where we're going on that to detract from the attention from the book. So links are in the description, you guys. Hyphenated-Nation, don't check the box, is available on paperback. It's you can get it on your Kindle as well. And would like to thank Miss Nicole Draffen for joining us today. Where can they find you? What are your social medias, like your Instagrams and whatnot, if they want to message?
Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all under Hyphened-Nation.
Perfect. So links in the description, guys. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. And we thank you for joining us. And we look forward to having you when you come and you can sit in the studio. It's nice and cool down here too. So
I miss that.
It's really hot here right now. It's like 90 3 degrees outside today.
Oh, that is hot.
Yeah, it's absurd. So I'm
Yes.
happy to be down here. So when you said, yeah, I can podcast, I'm like, perfect. Because as long as I don't have to be upstairs, it's perfect.
Yeah,
It's a great place to be.
Hot. That's hotter than here, and I'm in California.
Yeah, what
it's
part
only
of California?
Like 80 degrees here. Southern California.
Oh, right on. You're in LA or further south?
Yeah, near the LA. I'm in LA suburb.
Oh, okay. I used to live around those parts for many years.
Okay, so you know.
Yeah, I miss it. Definitely. I miss my car. I actually have a car that's set in the parking lot out there rotting away. So I need to.
Yeah, I try to drive overseas, but I know they wouldn't say it, but driving on the wrong side of the road for me was a complete very difficult.
Too much.
Yes.
It takes some getting used to. The first time I did it, I was driving my ex-wife's dad's car, and I put the wheels on the curb a time or two. But that's because you're driving on the opposite side of everything, you know.
Yes.
I find it more difficult when I go home because I have to stop because I start to pull out on the wrong side of the street.
I did that and turned into traffic. So it takes your brain a minute to get, you know. So yeah, I know it is.
That's wild. So thanks for joining us. We look forward to having you back on the podcast, and good luck with your book and your future endeavors. And I look forward to hearing how it all turns out.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Don't forget, guys, we are always available for your feedback. And as we say, rate, review, subscribe if you're on Spotify listening and Apple Podcasts. And hit us up at v3tv.uk. And we will see you when we see you. Thanks for tuning in, and peace.